think we have to start. Otherwise,
Yeah,
it will start
done.
it will start the Joe Rogan way, like in the middle of the conversation. So, Kim Witczak, welcome to Resilience.tv. Do I pronounce the name right?
Yes.
Witczak? Yeah, Witczak.
Well, it's funny. In When I was in Poland, I remember they would say Witczak, how you're pronouncing it. But in the States, like Witczak, like sack of wits,
Yeah,
is how I say it. But yes, you are pronouncing it correctly.
great. You are an international drug safety advocate as well as a marketing and advertising consultant. You run a grassroots organization, Woody Matters, and you work as consumer representative on the FDA Psychopharmacologic Drug Advisory Committee. So far, did I get that right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Would you want to add anything?
No, I like to say I have a popcorn career. I do a little of this, a little of that, but I think the most thing that I'm mostly passionate is about my drug safety advocacy work. It's kind of, as I like to say, I like to call myself the accidental advocate because I never chose to do drug safety advocacy work, but sometimes, as I always say, sometimes our greatest purposes choose us, and that's how I got into, and we'll get into the story, I'm sure, but that's probably my most passionate thing that I do is drug safety.
I think we can start right away because indeed you call yourself an accidental activist. So something turned you into one, and maybe you could start by sharing your story. Um,
Sure, sure. Yeah, I never would choose to go out and do pharmaceutical drug safety work. However, on August 2003, so over 21 years ago, I got a call that literally changed the trajectory of my life. In one phone call, my dad called to tell me that my husband of almost 10 years, Woody, was found dead, hanging from the rafters of our garage. We, like, before that, months before, we've been happily married. We both had successful careers. We both traveled. And in that 1 second, I was like, what? Like, what just happened? Like, my entire life had just blown up with a phone call. And so Woody wasn't depressed. Woody had no history of depression. Woody had just started his dream job with a startup company and was having trouble sleeping, which is not uncommon for entrepreneurs. Like, I don't know about you, but even, the middle of the night, I wake up. It does not mean that you are, that you have a mental illness. But Woody was a guy who needed 8 hours of sleep. And he was also, as I call him, like the classic Humpty Dumpty, like, athlete goes to the doctor. If he breaks a bone, you go to the doctor. If he can't, he like just did what most people did, which was, he went and sought some help from his GP, his doctor that he had seen for years. And I'll never forget, Woody went to go see him and was given a 3-week sample pack of a drug called Zoloft and said it would take the edge off and help him sleep. And the sample pack that he came home with automatically doubled the dose after week 1. And I happened to be out of the country because it was my busy time of the year in advertising production. So I was down in New Zealand on a BMW shoot, and when Woody got put on this drug, so I wasn't even there those first 3 weeks that he was on this medication. I come home, and I'll never forget something that will stick with me to the end of my time on Earth. But it was also kind of the impetus of something that when I go into like some of the documents, I'll never forget. I was excited to see Woody. Woody walked in our back door. He dropped his bag at the floor. He was completely drenched through his blue dress shirt, and he falls into a fetal position on the floor. And he was like, "Kim, you got to help me. I don't know what's happened to me. My head's outside my body. I don't know if I can handle one of these." And he's rocking back and forth. And I'm like, I'd never seen that kind of behavior from him ever. And so, of course, I did what I knew to do at the time, which was calmed him down. We did yoga breathing. We prayed, just to get him to like calm down because I had never seen this. And eventually he called his doctor, and the doctor said, you got to give the drug 4 to 6 weeks to kick in. That was the response from this head outside the body. And every night the next week of Woody's life, Woody would come home and think everything was about beat this feeling in his head. I'm going to beat this feeling in my head. What do you think about acupuncture? I'm going to beat this feeling in my head. What do you think about hypnosis? Like, what do you think about the chiropractor? Like, he was looking for any kind of solution to beat this feeling in his head. And so I happened to leave out of town again. Like I said, it was my busy time. I hadn't heard from Woody on the morning of August 6th. So I kept calling him all day. And finally, at the end of the day, I'm like, hey, Dad, do me a favor. Go check and see if Woody hit his head. I'm afraid he's not sleeping. So I'm afraid something might have happened. Literally, that phone call that I got from my dad, that was the last thing I would have ever, ever, ever have expected from my husband. And in that phone call, obviously I'm sitting there in Detroit. We never, at the time, never once questioned the drug because it was FDA approved, right? It was given to him by his doctor, and it was advertised as sold and safe and effective. And so we never questioned it. But how did Woody go from not sleeping to head outside the body to hanging in a total of 5 weeks? 5 weeks. And the night that Woody was found, the coroner asked a simple question. Was Woody on any medication? And the only medication he was taking was Zoloft. And she proceeded to say she needed to take it with her. It might have something to do with his death. So really, that was kind of the impetus of, what became now my 20-year plus year drug safety advocacy. Is it all started with something that made absolutely no sense. How a guy who loved life, we were just planning to start having a family. We just booked our 10-year anniversary trip. He was running during that whole time. He was a big runner. So that is really the start of and the foundation of my drug safety work. And it's the why behind my work today.
So, if you had not had that call with the coroner, and you mentioned also a newspaper article at the time, you would not have gotten in this. You would not have asked yourself questions about his medication.
Yeah, I don't know that I would have initially. I think, it's that coroner gave us that really ask the simple one question, right? What medication? At that point, I would never have thought the medication. Like because why would you? I keep thinking about, why do a lot of people think like, oh, a medication is supposed to help you, not hurt you, right? And looking back, it's there. I will say that intuitively, everything in my body said there's no way that Woody would kill himself. There must be something. And I always say that, like, if something happens to you and something that like literally is out of the blue, and it's sudden, you kind of go in this investigation mode, like to leave no stone unturned. And so I'm really grateful for the coroner who asked that question. And also, I mean, we were shocked when we saw the front page of our newspaper that had an article that said the UK finds link between antidepressants and suicide and in teens. And so that really started the journey of, like, back in the day, I say thank God for Google, because you could start, we live in a different world today, but back then you could Google and you started seeing all of this information and learning this information. And probably one of the things that was most shocking to us when we first started looking into this was that the FDA held hearings in 1991, 12 years before Woody died. And it was on the emergence of violence and suicide with Prozac. And basically all these people came forward, told their stories, and the people that sat on that FDA advisory committee all had monies. They had ties to the pharmaceutical companies making antidepressants. And they voted, nope, we don't see any link between it, right? I mean, of course, when you look at where their money was coming from. And the FDA never did anything about it. And so they told Eli Lilly to study suicidality. I'm not sure the company ever really did, or the FDA never followed up. And it wasn't until 2000, now look at all those years that passed by, and you have Paxil on the market, you have Zoloft on the market, you have it being used for kids, all ages. And it wasn't until really that pivotal time of like late 2000, it was like in August 2003, but that became like a drive to get these warnings, because if we're smart and we were blindsided, the FDA certainly knew about it. And then from during this time, I also realized there were a bunch of other families that lost people too. And so it really became like a mission to get black box suicide warnings added to these medications.
Ah, so how did it start? Right away with the black box warning? Or, I mean, there were first steps once you started to suspect that there was a causal relationship between the antidepressant and your husband's death. How did you start? I mean, how does one start in such a situation?
Sure. Well, one of the first things we did, even before, we just started researching, right? And when I say we, it was my sister's husband, my brother-in-law, and I. I mean, I don't know how I would have ever done it without him, but we started researching everything. I mean, if you came to my kitchen table, we had binders worth of, um, you know, um, paper and things on the internet, and we'd go to the library and newspaper articles. And so we just started kind of putting it all together, just a piece together. Then we started realizing that something had to be done out in DC. I live in the middle of the country, the US. And really, where all this conversation, the FDA is out in DC. So I call it the battle for Woody. We met with our local Minnesota representative and told him our story. And then he made introductions to other representatives out in DC, even though they didn't, we weren't in their districts. And then we also had a ultimately we started meeting other families or reading about other families, like young kids who were given it for moving and they had anxiety, and then all of a sudden 7 days later they hung themselves, like little kids out of their closet, in their closets, test anxiety. So we started connecting with families. We also had we talked to different law firms, and we saw that there was one big law firm out of Los Angeles that was kind of the leader behind all of these antidepressant suicide cases. And once, I guess, I never really heard any of this in the news before because it wasn't on my radar. And once it becomes on your radar, you start connecting dots, and then it becomes like, oh, we're going to do something with this. And so we ended up taking some of our research. We hooked up with, and I also learned something. If there are people like international people like David Healy, who was over in the UK, who was kind of one of the leading people that we read about in one of the newspaper articles, right? We happened to, and we ordered his books, and we ordered Peter Bregan's books, and we started to, it's what I will always tell people: if there's somebody that you want to meet, send them an email. Because out of my surprise, David Healy and Bregan, these guys actually responded to us, and we started feeding us more information. And then it really became, let's do something about it. And when we did meet and got meetings with the FDA, head of their, like the main guys that were responsible for this class of drugs. And we had a meeting with them. And that's where I learned something very, that is kind of pivotal to all my work today, which was they literally told me, because I thought they would be interested. I really thought they would be interested in how did this healthy guy who had no history of depression get put on an antidepressant, which I learned was off label, which means it was never even approved for what he got it for, sleep. But how did he go from healthy to head outside the body to hanging in 5 weeks? Like, I would have thought for sure they would have been interested. And literally, what the FDA officials told us at that meeting was, oh, well, we didn't see that this isn't happening in the double blinded, placebo controlled clinical studies, that this is just an anecdote. And so we had other families that they kept calling us anecdotes. And I was like, wait, these are not anecdotes. These are real people. These are real family members, their husbands, wives, kids, aunts, uncles. Like, what are you talking about? They all have names. They are not anecdotes. And so that actually adds fuel to your fire. Let me say a lot of this adds fuel to your fire. And so we eventually, the FDA, because of the pressure that I think was also coming from the UK, where they put the warnings, or they were also doing investigations at the same time looking into what was happening with the antidepressants in kids. Eventually, the FDA did hold hearings like the one in 91. So where we got to come together at an open public forum. It was like, and families would tell, like, at 3 minutes to tell their story after story. And so that was really the start. I know it seems so, it seems like it was like a pretty, easy path, but it, really what it took was a relentless drive to do something about what happened. I think when you're in the middle of grief, you're trying to make sense of it. But I also feel like that is part of the healing too, is to do something that what happened to your loved one doesn't happen to somebody else. So it makes, it makes, it makes their death a little easier, because again, if it can happen to Woody, it can happen to anybody.
Yeah, it gives some purpose to something that is so unjust and absurd on its own. That it give it some meaning for everybody, actually, because it's a universal situation. Everybody could get in the same situation. It's completely unpredictable.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, like you said, it can happen to anyone. And I believe that, and this is where I say the purpose kind of chose me in a way, like maybe I was meant to go do this and be a voice for families that weren't in a drive. I didn't have kids. So I threw myself into this. This was my kid. This was my legacy for my husband, that no, like, I want to do something with his life. Like, it just, our life fell apart. So if I could go do something. And so God gave me an ability to speak. He gave me an ability to not quit. And, and again, no, like, I think when you had something like this that was so unjust, and knowing like who Woody was, like, there's no way you were going to get away with this. And so, the nice thing with, and the battle for Woody, as I called it, I would work with the media I was like, no one was going to like stop me. I'm like, hey, I know how the media works. We're going to, like, if we can use Woody's story so that some other family, because back in 91, I was in college. I didn't even pay attention. I knew nothing about any of the issues. We didn't have family members that were on Prozac or had issues, so like, if I could use the media to help tell Woody's story, that was one angle, the media. Like I said, the lawsuit which is not for the faint, suing a drug company, but I had amazing lawyers who had, during this whole time, had already done discovery, where they were inside Pfizer's files and they were inside these companies, where for years they had documents And this is why, the companies don't like litigation, because you can get into their files. They had documents that talked about head outside the body, where somebody from it was from the South African FDA equivalent agency writing to Pfizer's chief medical officer, talking about doctors complaining, having patients complaining that they were outside their heads looking in on 50 milligrams, which is exactly what Woody said. And Pfizer writes back, "Oh, it happens on all SSRIs. We don't know why." And so when they started showing me these documents, and they worked incredibly hard, and we had a really good judge in my case that released these documents, because for years Pfizer had argued that these were trade secrets. And, I'm sure they were trade secrets because they were keeping something secret from the public, right? But so the judge released all of these documents. And so I was able to use, trust me, we kind of laugh. We'd bring binders worth of all these documents that were FDA letterhead, Pfizer letterhead, Eli Lilly emails. Like, when you start seeing it all, not if you're not going to believe what happened to my story, but you see it on their letterhead and you put those two together, you cannot ignore what has been seen and done to the public.
What was your first achievement? Because I think you and the people who joined you had several victories over time, over several years. So what was really your first win?
Gosh, I would say one of our first wins would be the black box warning that got put on the antidepressants for kids in 2004. Now, that was a win because parents were completely blindsided. And for putting their kids on these medications. So that was a win. But it didn't go far enough for me because Woody was age 37, right? And so that was for kids under 18. So we kept pushing the FDA to have all ages added to the warning. And so ultimately, the FDA raised it to age 24, but some of the internal company documents show that the FDA had never seen, but they were documents that were part of Pfizer UK, where the highest rates of suicide were 1 to 30 days, 50 milligrams, and 30 to 40 years old. So all three of those were Woody. So we were trying to really work. And so we did get it raised to 24, but one of the things that we did is realize if we can't count on the FDA to do their work, because they were giving, we held a big press conference before the FDA advisory board meetings, where the media could come and hear all of the experts. The experts, what I learned is the FDA chooses certain people that present at these meetings. The people who might have a different point of view, especially when it comes to safety and harms, they are not given the equal amount of time to present at the FDA. They're given 3 minutes like I was given. So we did. So I think this is a victory in that we held a press conference where we invited all of these experts at the National Press Club, where they were able to give a talk about how it should be all ages, so that the media had it in their minds when they went into the FDA advisory committees. So I thought that was a victory. I think another victory was most people don't realize that the FDA worked against the families that had lawsuits. And they had appointed one of President Bush at the time had appointed the chief counsel, so the head of the legal department at the FDA, had appointed him without congressional approval. And meanwhile, what he was doing is he came from industry. He was intervening in all these private lawsuits, and he was the chief architect behind something called the preemption brief which is basically the FDA was intervening in all these private lawsuits with an amicus brief, which means a friend of a court. So what they were basically giving the judges in these courts, this point of view from the FDA saying, even if the drug company wanted to approve, we're the FDA, we went to let them warn, because we are so basically what people don't know is that guy who came into the FDA took $300,000 from Pfizer before, and so we helped to expose it, and ultimately Dan Troy left the FDA, but not before damage was done. They tried, trust me, Pfizer tried using that argument in my case twice. But Dan Troy left, and he ultimately, this is where I learned the concept of revolving doors, because he went back to industry and he became global chief counsel for GlaxoSmithKline. And so that to me is a really big win for me, because we exposed this guy who was intervening, but not before it, throughout a lot of lawsuits. But this guy knew exactly what he was doing. So anyway, so I feel like that was a win. But at the end of the day, when I still look at 20 some years later and I keep getting, we hear of these suicides, I'm like, I feel like I still want all ages to be warned for these medications. So,
And it is not the case as of today.
yes, as of today, age 24, and we obviously there's a lot of high profile, even the most recent royal family out of the UK, who the inquiry into her husband's death came back and said it was the drugs. And so to me, these drugs, it doesn't matter if you are 24, if you're 12, if you're 18, like all ages should be warned. All ages, all families should have the information that these guys know is and can happen with these medications.
Yes, I read today a paper in a British newspaper. I think it was in the Independent, about Thomas Kingston, right?
Yes.
He had an adverse reaction to citalopram, which is another SSRI, so it's really the same kind of drug that your husband was taking. And they also mentioned that MHRA, the British FDA, was currently reviewing over 30 antidepressant medications over potential links to suicide. So, indeed, 20 years later, it's the same can happen to other people, and we don't get the proper information about the risks of those medicines. So, why? I mean, I do have my ideas, but why is this problem still ongoing?
Well, I believe it's a big systemic problem. I mean, there's a lot of protection, there's a lot of money that needs, and reputations that need to protect these medications. I think it's the quick, simple fix. Here's a pill, take it, you're sad, take it. It's one of the biggest toolkits, the tool in the toolkit to just throw at somebody. And I think it's really, I think money talks. I think they don't want to, when I say the system doesn't like to talk about harms. The system wants to protect. There's a lot of money that's being made with these medications, even if they're generic now. But the thing is, as consumers, I mean, obviously I have opinions about what we can do, but there is a lot of, I mean, we should be questioning them. And I don't understand, like, I'll never understand. It's the same thing that we heard back in the day. Well, warnings scare people. Warnings scare people. And we still hear, because there's efforts to even want to take off the black box warnings, blaming the warnings for the suicides. I'm like, no, do you think that consumers are dumb? No, they're not dumb. You are like, we know it's called information for a reason. It's because when you see a loved one, or I was reading the article in the Independent that you were talking about, and her wife and his wife, Kingston's wife, was seeing behaviors that she might have had a chance, if she even knew, to look for a behavior. Or when Woody was sitting on the floor telling me his head's outside his body, or if people are walking back and forth and it's called akathisia, which is a side effect, like they need to know, or even the simple ones of like this post-sexual dysfunction, that is a huge problem with these antidepressants. And so if you don't know the information, so I think there's a lot of people that want to protect the pills as it's profitable, it's easy, but I think it's called information for a reason. Informed consent we need to have as people.
Yes. And I think you mentioned the PSS, whatever, the post SSRI sexual dysfunction.
Yep.
So, with the understanding, one always has to mention this, that you are not a scientist, but you are someone who acquired a deep knowledge of this topic. What is your opinion on the safety of the antidepressant medications in general, or rather, maybe what safety issues should patients know about before they start taking these medications? What would be your own insert warning? What would be your own black box if you could write one? What are the main problems?
Sure. Well, first of all, I would question, should the drug be being used first line regardless? I mean, are there other non pill related options that should have been that should be tried first? That would be one. Number two, I think we need to have all information. The most dangerous parts of these drugs are when you go on, off, and withdrawal. I mean, people can't get off of these. There should be an exit strategy. But what happens is, a lot of these doctors are not aware of the side effects like the akathisia, and they just think it's your disease getting worse. So they put on another medication and it becomes a cascade of medications. I think it's really important that that they know the risks of any of the post-sexual dysfunction. That's a risk, right? It's called informed consent. I also think it's really important to even go back further and upstream, is the data isn't really there to support that these drugs, like in the US, like we only need 2 clinical trials, or at least these were approved, that the data was barely above placebo for it to be efficacious, not even talking about the safety. So then it goes like, wait, if they're not even that, the efficacy isn't there and you have the safety issues, we've got a problem. And so I think all of that is really important for consumers. But really, to go even, like I said, first and foremost, we should medications, the quick pill culture, the quick fix culture, should that actually be our first option? Should, as consumers, I think we need to think differently. I think, the doctors and the system, because it's a system and it's not just antidepressants, it's the whole systemic, that's driven by other self-interests, that I think we need to really take things into our own hands as well.
Is that also one of the reasons why you decided to stick around at the FDA, working as a consumer representative? I mean, what made you go further than after those first victories and stay as a consumer representative?
Good question, because I often wonder, why did I stay? Just kidding. Actually, it's because, originally I thought it was just an issue with antidepressants, right? And then I quickly realized, oh no, this is a huge systemic problem with our drug safety, and it's how drugs come on market, and how like the post market when there's safety issues. And then I started seeing the influence that pharmaceutical companies have on research and all the government agencies, and then the marketing and the advertising, and the journal and ghostwriting and key opinion leaders. And so I started seeing this big spider web, and I thought, you know what? Harms are always going to be an after fact. I mean, nobody wants to talk about harms. If you think about it, like, the point of the FDA is it's a hurdle for the companies to get it onto drugs on market, and it becomes a business. And so, coming from an advertising background, marketing, I've had to dig deep and understand the good, bad, ugly of many, many industries. And I saw it eventually as, oh, wait, this is just another industry. And I think with health for so long, we've blindly given away our, like, oh, the guys in the white coat, the women in the white coat, like, we've given our powers away. But I was like, wait, this is just another big industry. This is no different than the car industry, the food industries. It's just that these products have a should be held at a higher standard because they can actually kill you. And so, anyways, that's where I thought I can use my voice. I have a role in being the consumer representative, meaning, because I think most of the advisory boards that I have seen, and still to this day, they don't stack them with people like me. And so I think I'm anomaly on the advisory committee that comes from safety first, because seeing how the drugs are coming to market, you realize, oh, it's becoming less and less about efficacy, like, it's that balance, risk harm balance. But you're like, harms don't even get talked really about. Harms are assumed that once it is on the market, we'll deal with it then. But the reality is, these clinical trials are coming, products are on less and less people, but it's going to be used potentially on millions and millions of people. And so, anyways, so that's kind of why, I still want to make sure that the voice of the everyday person who's going to be taking these medications actually has a voice in some of these conversations. It may be the only one, but at least it's on record that that someone was looking out when it becomes a potential safety issue down the road.
And I have to tell you that I am very glad that you are doing this job, because someone has to be there to try and represent us as patients. And sometimes it must be very lonely among people who have different interests than the patient's interests in their minds and hearts.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I learned during all of this, I learned how even the organizations that are supposedly representing patients or the disease, they're actually not representing, or they're getting their funding. A lot of them are getting their funding from pharmaceuticals. So are they really representing the independent, everyday person like you and me, who go to the doctor and just trust and assume that it's FDA approved, it must mean that it works and it's not going to harm you? And so I realized that we are the real market, but who's representing us? Like, who's representing this person of your family member?
Yeah, I think what you are mentioning here is called astroturfing, right?
Mhm.
The fake patient associations, which are actually representing the industry more than they are representing the patients. And you
Yeah,
also mentioned the revolving doors. In Europe, we have, I think, one of the craziest instances of a revolving door with I think she's still the current president of the EMA, Emmer Cookie, which was employed by the main pharmaceutical lobby in Europe before she became head of the EMA, which is completely insane. But in the US, you had like Scott Gottlieb and other
yeah,
who approved a medication from Pfizer or Moderna, and then went on to work either for Pfizer or for Moderna's one of the companies above Moderna. So it's completely insane. Whichever direction it goes, I mean,
You know what?
it's
Like that's where I learned that whole thing with Dan Troy, who did the legal. Like, oh wait, they just go from inside, outside, outside in. Like, it's just becomes it's part of how you can actually you figure out how the system works. It's a business. Like at the end of the day, it's a business. But that's where I think when people really take a step back and they don't because again you're sick you want to get better you know it's this whole idea you don't really think about these things on a very deep level which I have spent the last 20 years thinking about it on a very deep level and then realizing I was shocked again I felt like every little thing was like I would just open up another little door and I find like oh wait you mean doctors don't learn how the FDA works like how if the doctors don't learn about how the FDA works how are they going to know the questions to ask and so then I would just kind of keep going down another rabbit hole and then realize oh wait pharmaceutical companies and like they're driving a lot of the research agendas at the universities and the idea that safety or foods and stuff like that isn't even taught in med schools. Like what I now have been I call it the spider web. I've created this spider web and it's like the patient doctor in the middle and it's like the trappings. And I can send you so you could even put it on the show notes. But in there, you're like realizing if we don't know, if the people don't know, if doctors don't know, we don't know, then we are all part of the game and we're being trapped and I think it's really important so I'm trying to get into med schools to I've been invited to a couple med schools where I'm actually talking about the title of the talk is how a accidental advocate discovered America's broken drug safety system and I use the spider web and I talk about the elements like ghostwriting key opinion leaders the academic institutions, because I learned most of this because I would travel to international conferences and it wasn't and they would use US as an example. And our doctors and our system isn't teaching the students. And so I think it's a really important piece that needs to be part of med school curriculums as well.
Yes, thank you for doing this because in Switzerland as well, most MDs have no ID. Uh, and they don't even have the statistics are not really seriously taken in med school. So they can't really read the studies unless they are epidemiologists or they do some extra hours. They don't know about the history of corruption. I mean, there is no information. So they are just as ignorant of this as we patients. It's really the same basic level of ignorance of how the system works.
Right.
Um, so I wanted to ask you also about COVID-19 because, I mean, it's a whole chapter, of course, in itself, but uh, in a way, it might be one of those paroxystic moments of the drug industry's hold on our lives and the amount of the networks of influence and almost at some point corruption that the pharmaceutical industry has created. So, what is your take on what happened during COVID? And maybe particularly, what is your take on the approval process, the post-approval safety monitoring, which are topics you really know very well now?
Sure. Well, first of all, I never really did in my work, I've never really did much in the vaccine safety world, right? However, when COVID-19 came and I started watching, I'm like, for starters, you gave companies like Pfizer complete legal immunity for any future harms. So that was like a light bulb. Like, what? The companies that has paid more fines, you're giving them complete legal immunity? that made no, like for me that was a huge red flag. Then it became everything was, it was fast tracked using this emergency use authorization, and I'm seeing a lot of the drugs that are coming to market using some kind of fast tracking mechanism, which always means it is going to be less focused on safety. It's about getting it, it's rushed, it's getting it approved on the market. And then when I think back to the COVID, the program, they let the people who were in the placebo group, they actually let them cross over and get the vaccine. So you completely destroyed the clinical trial. Like, I mean, again, I'm not a scientist, but I think I remember that you got to always keep a placebo group and a control group, right? So like we lost that, and there was no discussion of down the road, like what is this really going to do? And then, so that those were some of my original flags, and that there were, then it became a marketing game, right? So I could see it from the marketing where it was like, oh, wait, if you get your shot, you can come in for a free donut a day for a year. And I was like, oh my God, this is sales promotion. Like we do this every day, but it might not be a first shot. um, so I was like, this is all about marketing and how they were using fear and then the media. And it was like a great study of marketing, media, the government, and then it became about mandating people into like taking, and you couldn't, it took away people's freedoms, and it was being positioned as um, one size fits all. Well, I've learned in my drug safety work, first of all of our bodies are very different. We're all gonna, even like just in how like Woody, somebody like people, I heard this for years, like, oh, I've taken antidepressants, I'm fine. Well, that doesn't mean that everyone's fine. And so that idea of one size fits all was really, really concerning for me. And again, watching this kind of coordinated effort around the world from the media and the government officials, everybody was saying, it was almost like they were all speaking off of, like if I was head of PR for our company and I wanted to give everybody like talking points, I would give everybody a sheet and everybody's talking off the same talking sheet. So I'm like, you start connecting all the dots, and it became like this um, global um, kind of coordinated marketing effort, and it didn't actually stop the virus, and it was all sold on fear. And I've always thought like this idea of even just medications in general, if you really watch what's happening, fear is used and hope, and those two are constantly, they're basically the same side of this, or different sides of the same coin, right? And how it gets positioned and when it gets positioned. So anyways, those were some of my first red flags. And it's funny, I have this whole thing that I've done over the years. It's my own notes of like how the antidepressants and how C19 are, how they're similar. And yeah, I mean, I think the trials should have been something, and the fact that you couldn't use certain medications um, to help somebody. I mean, so there were a lot of issues for me. One of the blessings, or one of the good things I think that has come out of COVID is I think a lot of new eyes have been opened, and I think lights have been shined in a system that has been really corrupt for a long time.
Yes, I think it could be one of the unexpected blessings coming from the COVID crisis. It's really the number of medical doctors and the patients online who are sharing that their eyes are opened now, and they are much more aware of the corruption of the pharmaceutical industry and the unreliability of the FDA and the EMA, etc. I think it's a positive change, and it might have positive consequences. Maybe already the fact that Robert Kennedy has been named as, well, hopefully future head of the HHS by Trump is already a sign that the times are changing. It would have been unthinkable a few years ago, I think. Um, I wanted to ask you because you've been following the new medications, I think, with a keen eye, and maybe you could share with us what you think are maybe some medications that we are not worrying enough about, that might have some safety issues that we are not seeing yet or not taking seriously enough. I know you did post a few tweets about like Ozempic or Depo-Provera. So are those medications, or are there other medications that you are a little worried about?
Sure. Well, I mean, for without a doubt, the whole GLP ones, the Ozempic, Wegovy, again, I look at the medications that have mass appeal, right? Because that's where a lot of money is being made and a lot of effort is being pushed. And so, lifestyle. I mean, I've learned this a long time ago. Like antidepressants are a lifestyle. The statins are a lifestyle. They're those kind of medications that I think we should all be worried about. The fact that the Ozempic, no one's really well, I go back to something that I always love to follow. It's the JP Morgan healthcare conference that is every January, and it's where they bring in all the fund. It's all the money aspect of the business. And they finally came back in person last year or the year before from COVID. And the two areas that they said are the biggest potential for business are weight loss drugs and everything to do with the Alzheimer's, anything to do with Alzheimer's, right? And so for me, right there is like it was like a flag. All right, we're going to be following those because there's a lot of money that's going to be made, and it's about being the money being made. When I look at Ozempic, I have friends that are reinsurance agents. That reinsurance basically are the insurance agencies that insure like for future lawsuits and stuff. There was, and I am trying to find it because, of course, you got to get somebody to come on and say it publicly. But the word on the street is they're telling people to put $500 million away for future loss every quarter for future lawsuits that are coming. So they know that there are lawsuits that are going to be coming. So it's all about let's make sunshine, like let's make hay while the sun shines. And again, it's exactly what happened with like the antidepressants. And we know there are going to be people, we know we're going to like the acceptable collateral damage that will be coming, the cost of doing business, but we can make a lot. And sure, people are losing weight, but we don't know what's going to happen. And we are seeing some of it, right? We are seeing some stuff now, but we don't know long term. And I think that's something that, people really need to think twice. I'm looking at what kind of drugs have come towards into my committee, and they have been around like Alzheimer, dementia related, in the psychosis. And I was like, oh yeah, this is going to be another area. The whole and the and again, I want to say, why aren't we going upstream? Let's look at what's causing these problems in the first place. But we're so used to it's part of that quick fix culture as well as lifestyle, and those have big medications. So those are the ones that I follow, and I haven't really because there are a lot of people doing, but I do have to wonder about all the cancer. I feel for as much money has that we have been spending for the moonshot, and I've seen from my early advocacy days, everything is for the kids and cancer. And so went out in DC, the funding. And I'm like, for all the monies that we have been putting out there, how come we're even worse and far worse off than we used to be with all the money and money that's being put into research?
Yes, I think Alzheimer and cancer are two examples because in both cases, you have valid approaches based upon dietary interventions, supplementation, um, repurposed drugs, which are systematically attacked, um, even when they look like they are promising and they could deliver results if they would if they started to get used systematically and if they were more robust RCTs organized and paid for. So indeed, in those two domains like Alzheimer and cancer, it looks fishy for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah.
And you think about, again, I'm going to go back to a simple thing that my husband used to tell me. If you ever want to get to the bottom of anything, Kim, you got to follow the money. And when you start looking at that, and you're looking at if there's repurposed drugs that are available to actually help, um, but yet there's a really expensive new treatment that's coming. Where's the money going? And then it's also like, again, where is the focus on, if is it really about, and I know this is probably a cynical point of view, but patients are customers. And if we look at healthcare as a business, you have to have customers, you have to have sickness, and you have to keep people, like, you don't really want the effort to be on health. I mean, that's not where the money is, and it should be, because that's about human, I mean, or at least that's what I would think. But I look back, and I'm going to bring up something that I thought was fascinating. It was part of this whole idea of like selling sickness and this cradle to grave strategy of keeping people in their products, right? The CEO of Merck, in an interview with Fortune magazine or Forbes in the 70s, said that he wanted to be, because you can't keep selling products to sick people. You need to. I want to sell to healthy people and sell to be like Wrigley's gum and have a product for everybody. And so I kind of feel like that has been the attitude of an industry for a very, very long time. And now it has gotten so big that have we lost our focus and bringing it back to truly about health and well-being for people?
Wow. I mean, we could almost end there because that was a great message that you just gave us. Maybe I would still like to ask you one last question because you've spent 20 years, more than 20 years, fighting a very challenging battle against very powerful interests. What keeps you going, and what are your hopes for the future?
What keeps me going? What keeps me going is I get contacted by people all the time that lose somebody in the exact same way that Woody, and they ask me, how come I didn't know? And they're now doing what I did 20 years ago, and they're putting pieces together. And to me, that means that my work is not done, because I want to reach the lay audience that were like me, that had no idea. And so that keeps me going. That is my why. And I believe that there's so much power in you and I as people, and that is one thing, is we've given away our power. And I really want people to take a step back and realize that no one will care more about you or your family's health and well-being than you. The government's not, the doctors aren't, because they're not the ones that have to live with the consequences. And that is why I do what I do. It keeps me going, um, and it gives me hope that we have maybe a new kind of the new, I guess that's the blessing, or the silver lining that came out of COVID, that we've got people that are waking up to it, and maybe the people in DC, because I've always said, until there's somebody in power, I've been inside fighting it and it's not working. I feel like I'm beating my head up. I mean, I'll put my voice there, I'll be there, but the reality is it's going to change when ground up comes together with somebody inside these agencies that truly understands what we're fighting for.
Let's hope it happens soon.
Yeah,
We can have some hope given the current circumstances, political circumstances, but well, we'll see.
yeah.
Um, Kim Witczak, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for this interview, and thanks for everything that you are doing for us patients and us regular people. It's really appreciated. I